What's up, everyone? It's Friedemann from Menace Songwriting with yet another album series. This month, we're looking at Fall Out Boy's latest release, Mania, which released on the 19th of January. So far, 5 singles have been released: Young and Menace, Champion, The Last of the Real Ones, Hold Me Tight, or Don't, and Wilson. That was one title. I was like, with me as always is Clifford Stummy, who you can already hear laughing here, aka the Pop Song Professor, with his YouTube channel, also the Pop Song Professor.
Hello.
Where he explains lyrics to songs. So go subscribe to his channel as well. Cliff,
Yes.
What did you think about Mania?
Mania. I felt like a maniac. No, I listened to Fall Out Boy, and I've listened to Fall Out Boy before. I didn't feel like Mania, lyric-wise, was anything hugely special. And I've got some examples and stuff that we can talk about and go over. On the video where I did the review of it, I explained, pretty calmly and equitably to everybody that I'm not the hugest Fall Out Boy fan. So that means I have a lack of bias, I like to think. Rather than that, I'm going to rag on him. And that's something I try not to do, is rag on an album. I like to be pretty fair about it and everything. But there were a couple of things that just sort of rubbed me the wrong way here. Overall, it was very good for Fall Out Boy, but I just didn't feel like there was a ton of lyrical depth, and I'm sure we'll talk about some specific songs as we go on. What did you think about it?
I liked it. I am a fan, I would say. I have a bunch of their albums, and I like their 2005 period the best. When they released songs like Dance Dance, Sugar We're Going Down, and Thanks for the Memories. Those kinds of songs were probably my favorites of theirs. And I like this album as well. I don't think any of the songs came close to those songs that I just named, but I think there were some songs on here that were really, really cool. That being said, it took me a while to get into it. My first listen through, I was just really overwhelmed by the production, because it's really overproduced to a certain degree, and I had to watch a couple of live gigs of them to really understand the songs a little bit more, because the production is just so full on. There's just so much going on. It's such a dense sound. It's such a stadium sound. Everything sounds so big that I just had to watch them live to be oh, okay, yeah, this is still rock songs. It's just when you listen to the production, it sounds like it's, every single instrument is layered of 50 times or something like that. That's kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah, I may be wrong, but I'm guessing that overproduction is probably a fairly decent sign that they're, quote unquote mainstream, or they're very much like pop punk rather than true punk.
Yeah, I mean, they always were an interesting band to that degree, because they never sounded really rough punk. They always had a certain pop attitude to them. Their songs were always very poppy, always very danceable, which is not always common for punk music, which is more about aggression and letting go. So on this album, for the first time though, especially with the second track, The Last of the Real Ones, I had for the first time I had the feeling of hey, this kind of sounds like a rockier version of Maroon 5. Because it has some of those R&B elements, and his voice even sounds a little bit like, what's his name from Maroon 5? You know who I'm talking about.
Adam Levine.
And Adam Levine, that's right.
Yeah.
So I kind of for the first time, I thought you know what? A little bit like Maroon 5. And in terms of they have so their melodies are very melodic. There's a lot of different pitches, so it's usually not very one-note melody based. It's got a little bit of an R&B vibe to it. So it's got a little bit of that pop vibe, but apart from that, I think it's very much a rock album, more in the veins of Imagine Dragons, more so than maybe a real heavy rock band. But I mean, for sure, to me, it still sounds very much like a rock band, for sure.
It's interesting that you mentioned both Maroon 5 and Imagine Dragons, because those are two bands I've been thinking about a lot recently.
Romantically or professionally?
What, professionally?
Okay.
No,
just making sure.
Yeah. All three of these bands seem to be doing this sort of thing where they're, they come from a pretty well-defined genre. Maroon 5 was definitely rock. Fall Out Boy is punk rock, and Imagine Dragons, it was kind of this rock alternative, almost indie sort of weird mix-up. And they all seem Maroon 5 did this a long time ago, but with Imagine Dragons' Evolve album, they definitely made like huge strides toward being like just pop. And I feel like I haven't paid a lot of attention to Fall Out Boy in the past, but other than to listen to their singles and stuff. But I feel like this album is particularly from the lyrics perspective, and I'm sure you can continue to talk about it from the music side, but it just felt like it was there were just some conventions of pop lyric writing that were very apparent that you don't usually find in traditional punk lyrics. Usually punk lyrics are going to be very narrative based, and they're going to tell a kind of a story, and oftentimes the person who is singing the song is going to be sort of like an underdog hero. But with Fall Out Boy, they're on top of the world. And they do get rarely philosophical, which is something that punk rock is, I think, not all the time known for, because everybody will be able to point out one song where that's not true. But they don't get philosophical very often. But it's just interesting that even though while they do say like bad things happen to me sometimes, they never look bad as a result.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, to me it always seemed like their lyrics were more like other rock bands, more so than punk bands. Like, I mean, you're probably thinking of bands like Blink-182 and Sum 41, Offspring, those kinds of bands, right?
A little bit,
when you're thinking of punk. Yeah, me too, by the way. Like, those are like the quintessential punk bands for me too. But yeah, it's in terms of the rock lyrics. So Dave Grohl said in an interview that for his first couple of albums, he just kind of threw together a couple of lines that sounded cool. And since I come primarily from a rock background, and a lot of rock lyrics are a little bit silly, to be honest. Like it sounds like what Dave Grohl is talking about. It's just lines that kind of sound cool. Like there's one line in Wilson, I think. What was it again? Like the predominant line in the chorus. I'll stop wearing black when they find a darker color.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, and now that you mention that, honestly, I think that's a ton of what this album is I was looking back through the lines before we started talking today, and I kept thinking to myself, this line is right in front of this line, but they don't seem to connect at all. Like there's no logical connection. I can't explain why this makes sense. I don't know if it does even. It feels like stream of consciousness, and it's hugely stream of consciousness. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it really does seem that they borrow from the rock genre for lyrics then.
Yeah. And I don't mind it, because I think that's a cool line, and I like cool lines in lyrics, because I don't like, for me, listening to lyrics is something I don't do on the first listen through. Like the first couple of times actually I listen to a track, I'm really just going to listen to the music, and only like if a certain line sticks out to me, like that line that I just quoted, that's something that I'm really going to think about. And because it's such a cool line, for first couple of experiences, listening to it, that's the perfect kind of lyric for me, because it doesn't require me to really listen to everything to make sense of what I'm hearing.
Fun fact about that line, too, is that it's actually a quote from Wednesday Addams from the Addams Family movie, I think from 1991. So
interesting.
Yeah. They're digging pretty deep on that one. But yeah, no, I know what you're talking about, and that's a huge part of like writing hooks, right? Is finding not only melodies that are catchy and that people will want to like listen along to, but also finding words that are easy to remember, which sometimes means repetition, so that there's less to remember, but people can still sing along with it. But B, also interesting. Have some cool picture, or have like a really cool rhythm to this stressed and unstressed syllables, which I think this line definitely has.
Yeah, definitely. They've always been really good with longer lines. I feel like a lot of songwriters, myself included, we like short words, we like short titles, and Fall Out Boy always had these really massive titles. Similar to Panic, actually. Panic at the Disco also had these really long titles.
They're the kings of that, yeah.
Yeah, but Fall Out Boy also has these really long titles, but they make them work. They work in the songs. You listen to it and like, oh yeah, well, I guess that does work after all. But then they also have sometimes they have titles that just have nothing to do with the song at all. Like
Frosty Royal
Stay
Milk
Frosty
Tea.
Royal Milk Tea, right?
Yep.
Does that even appear in the lyric?
No, I don't think so. That would
have been a surprise.
If I see it, I'll say something. But no, actually, I don't found the lyrics, and no. Nothing like that at all. I think Stay Frosty Royal Milk Tea is actually maybe the names of the llama monsters that show up in their music videos, maybe.
Okay.
Or at least I've seen some theories about that. That seems to be the predominant theory. So, yeah, named after llama monsters. That's
Wait, so they're called Royal Milk Tea, the llama monsters?
Yeah, I think it's Stay Frosty and Royal Milk Tea are the names of the two llama monsters.
Oh, okay. I guess that makes complete sense now that I think about it.
Yeah.
So which were your favorite tracks on this album? Just in general, not even in terms of the lyrics, but
Sure.
which tracks did you enjoy the most?
I liked Wilson, Expensive Mistakes, and Hold Me Tight or Don't. Hold Me Tight or Don't, I liked because of the sound. And as everybody who has listened to this podcast before knows, I have a completely layman's perspective on the sound. I just thought it was the catchiest one. All right, it was probably also one of the more pop ones, and I'm the pop song professor, so I'm a sucker for pop. But then Wilson and Expensive Mistakes I liked, partially for the sound and just partially because it was interesting to listen to. And you don't often see parentheses in a title, so it was just intriguing, you know? But
yeah, not outside of rap anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my favorites were my two biggest favorites were for sure were The Last of the Real Ones and Young and Menace.
Mm-hmm.
Those two I thought were just really, really cool. Just really big fucking rock anthems. You know, that's kind of what I want out of Fall Out Boy. Wilson, I also really liked. That was probably my third favorite. And I liked Stay Frosty, Roll Milk Tea, Heaven's Gate, and Champion. And the rest of the album, I didn't really care for that much. So I'm not too much of a fan of Hold Me Tight or Don't.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a side of Fall Out Boy that I never really quite got into. It's kind of a little bit like This Ain't a Scene, It's a Goddamn Arms Race. That song also just never really got me for some reason. I never got into that song. I never got into that side of Fall Out Boy too much. So, I think it's a good album. It's just for me, I think what I always liked in Fall Out Boy were like the little bit darker songs so they've always been about this positive, cool power sound. Mm-hmm. It's always been kind of powerful, but some of their songs, the ones that I've mentioned earlier, Dance Dance, Sugar We're Going Down, and Thanks for the Memories, and that entire album, those had a certain beauty to them that was kind of a little bit darker. So they were finding some beauty in darkness, in sadness. That's something a little bit nostalgic almost.
Yeah.
And that's kind of always what I loved most about them. And this album doesn't have a ton of that. It has a little bit of it in The Last of the Real Ones and a little bit in Young and Menace, but not that much. So
there wasn't that spark.
Yeah, there wasn't that spark.
Yeah.
It didn't really emotionally grab me as much as the titles that I just mentioned.
You know what it honestly felt like? It felt like I went to a buffet, like a music buffet, and the person behind the counter was like, "Well, what would you like to eat?" And I was like, "I'd like a dish of Fall Out Boy." And they just got their spatula and they glopped up a big dish of Fall Out Boy and they handed it to me. And it's like, I felt like when they wrote this album, they were like, "All right, we're gonna make this very Fall Out Boy-y," and they were like, "We're just gonna, we're gonna follow a lot of the tropes and a lot of the ideas." And it didn't feel like they were pushing towards something new, at least, musically or lyrically for me.
Well, in terms of the music, they certainly introduced some new elements. I still agree with you. I think it's not something that anyone would call really revolutionary or anything. It's not reinventing the Fall Out Boy sound for sure. It's adding some more stuff to it, which I'm not sure if it really needed that. And that's mostly the electronic bits. We've heard that before, kind of, but this album has just more of that.
More of that overproduction you were talking about.
Yeah, maybe. That's a separate point though as well. But just more sounds. Like mostly that's this trap thing with like the trap hi-hats, the trap snares, and a little bit of soca in Hold Me Tight or Don't. A little bit of dubstep in Young and Menace. It's just all this electronic stuff in there that we hadn't really heard before, or we haven't had an entire album that had that kind of stuff. So I don't know. It's just kind of, it feels like they're jumping on the bandwagon, and it's just like, it's so easy to just put some trap hi-hats into a song and just everyone in the press is going to say, "Oh, they revolutionized their sound. They're still moving forward. They're still evolving as an artist." And I'm like, dude, it's the easiest thing. You can literally throw a trap hi-hat on any track out there. I challenge you to find me a song that wouldn't sound all right with a trap hi-hat or a trap snare roll. I mean, we talked about this last month when we talked about the Timberlake album. That was basically country, and you throw some trap hi-hats over it, and it's still fine. It still works. It's the easiest thing in the world.
I would like to hear Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen with some trap hi-hats. I feel like that's a challenge worthy of you. See if you can make that
Challenge
sound good.
accepted. Yeah. Seriously, like if anyone listening to this can make that just to prove me right in front of Cliff, I'm sure that can be done.
Yes,
like
please
I
send
can
that our
hear
way.
it right now in my head, and I'm like, yeah, that could totally work.
Shoot, I can start to hear it too. Dang it! All right.
I think it would be harder if you had like a faster song.
Yeah.
It's like da, 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 something like that. If it's faster, then I think it would be a real challenge. But anything that's kind of slow to start with, like just throw a trap hi-hat over it, and it kind of works.
All right. Hey, I had a question for you. You're generally, I think, a very positive person, and you're often looking for, what was good about this album? What was my favorite song? What was your favorite song? What were some of the tracks you didn't like?
Well, as I said, Hold Me Tight or Don't.
Yeah.
Church felt a little too, it was just too overloaded. It had like all these ideas. I mean, it's in 3/4, which is, I guess that's cool. But then it also has like these giant choirs in the background, which I mean, obviously ties in with the theme of the song. And then these bells, and it's just so much that it just kind of overloaded its message. Like this could have been a good song. It was just a little bit too much of everything, I think.
Yeah.
Sunshine Riptide was just, I don't know. It's like kind of like a reggae number on this. It was just a weird kind of departure from their sound. It worked okay. I just didn't love it. I just didn't think it was really good enough to be on this record. I think it was, oh yeah, okay, that's interesting. But it's more like, I expected this to be written for, like, if there was a video game and they asked Fall Out Boy to write something for it, I'd be okay with it. But on their album, I'm like, yes, is it really good enough though? And Bishop's Knife, Trick, also I felt I like that song. I thought that one was pretty cool. It had some of that nostalgia that I like in Fall Out Boy, but I felt it was also overproduced, and it just builds and builds and builds, and there's just so much stuff on that track at the very end of the song. It just felt really overloaded. I'm fine with that because it's the last track on the album, and typically only people who love the entire album will listen to that track still. Most people will just like cancel before that, and they'll just like listen to something else. So I think that's fine to do that on the last track, because it's only for the real fans who are like willing to have even more. They're willing to like listen to something that has even more stuff in it.
Yeah.
And it's for those kind of people, so I'm fine with that.
Hey, and that's a good principle of marketing. Play to your tightest audience. Don't play to the people who don't necessarily like your music. Play to the people who are crazy fans. Give them what they want.
And to their credit, it feels like that's what they did exactly with this album. And what I've gathered from the internet is that critics have been kind of mixed about it. They didn't really love it, but the fans were really excited about it, and I can totally understand that.
Yeah. No, it was interesting because I posted a review about it. At the beginning of my review, I said, hey guys, I'm a teacher, not a critic. And so that means I'm going to explain this to you more so than I'm going to tell you how you should feel about it. And in that, the comments, I was really surprised because everybody was like, thank you so much for not trashing this. Everybody else has been trashing this. Or they'd comment, that moment when you find a YouTuber who doesn't hate the new Fall Out Boy album. And so, yeah, you could tell like these were a bunch of Fall Out Boy fans seeking refuge, seeking somewhere safe to hear people talk about their favorite music without, having it be trashed.
Yeah. And I mean, I get it. I really get it. It's not something that they're going to attract a lot of new fans by.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really solid rock album. And some of the tracks, especially the ones I mentioned, in my opinion, like Young and Menace and the last of the real ones, I think are just really banger rock tracks.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're looking for that particular sound, if you like that sound, they've got it, and they've got lots of it.
Yeah, for sure.
And and I think that's part of the thing with the lyrics. Like, obviously, I get super picky about lyrics, and I often can get into I can accidentally expect something out of the lyrics that people aren't putting in there. I think what Fall Out Boy is doing with a lot of the lyrics here is they're touching on some common ideas or some common themes that show up in either rock or punk rock music, and they're putting those lyrics in there. I think really though, they're trying not to, there's a couple of lines that are like intentionally really good, but I think for the most part, it feels like they're trying to not distract from the music. They're trying to let people enjoy that sound without, some weird lyrics or some deep philosophical issues getting in the way of that enjoyment.
Yeah, I think they kind of have to. If you had like the lyrics to pay attention to as well, I think it would be really really too dense. I think it's already very dense. Like I got to be honest with you. It took me a whole listen through of the entire album before I could really start listening to any of the tracks in particular, because I was so overwhelmed by the production of it. It was just, it's so dense, like in terms of the harmonics, that I had to listen to the whole thing once, and then I listened to the tracks again, and then I did my analysis of it. And that's partly because the vocals are so saturated, meaning there's some kind of distortion on the vocals. And everything is double tracked, so you typically in their rock songs you'll have 3 voices blaring at you at full loudness, kind of, and all of them are saturated. So there's a lot of distortion going on. It makes their lyrics hard to understand as well. And at the same time, obviously, you have a distorted bass in the middle. You have a snare that's also got a lot of saturation on it. Everything is just like pumped to the max, and I found it really difficult to listen to on my first listen through. And as I said, I like had to listen to it live for a couple of songs to really like get back into the sound and be like, oh yeah, okay, so this is the song, and now this is and so I could kind of separate the two, production and song. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and also noticed what I thought was interesting about this album, and this is something they have in common with Imagine Dragons, is that this album is really vocal, bass, and drums driven, and the guitars, which I would think are like the most important instrument in rock music, are turned way down. I mean, they're not even half as loud. They're like a quarter the loudness of what they used to be. If you listen to their older tracks, and as I said, like Sugar We're Going Down, for example, it was like a really predominantly a guitar track. And now it feels like the bass is in charge of all the harmony, basically. And the drums are just filling up a lot of space. There's a lot of reverb on everything. And the vocals are taking up a lot of space as well. But I could pretty much listen to the whole album in mono, and I wouldn't be missing too many guitars.
It seems to be that correlates with some of this, the fact, like you're saying that they're overproduced, and then we talked about how it's a slightly different topic, that they are kind of doing some very mainstream stuff here. They definitely, it seems, want to get on like on the radio in the top 10 and everything. And I wonder if guitars are just less of they are less of a pop genre thing, aren't they? Like, isn't that kind of going more like the synth route? You definitely know more about that than I do.
Yeah, guitars are like kind of making their way back into pop music. We've had a couple of hit songs that used guitars. Thinking of I Don't Like It, I Love It, and oh man, I keep forgetting that name. Jeez, I'm terrible with names today, I told you. But I'll think of it. Da 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 da. What was that song? Letting You Know? Is that what it's called?
Gosh, I do not know.
I'm sure our viewers, listeners will know which one I'm talking about.
Somebody comment that in real time.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of guitars coming back. And I mean, if you look back at how things are repeating themselves, like we've had the 70s, we've had the 80s. Theoretically, we should go into the 90s now, and those were the grunge days. So theoretically, we should go get some Nirvana vibes coming soon in the next 10 years.
Hey, I can dig
decades. That. Yeah, me too. I'm a big fan, so I would be totally fine with that. Grunge is like my favorite music still, so I'd be super psyched if that happened to come back into pop music.
Hey, and they typically have pretty good lyrics too, so maybe they'll bring some of that with them.
Yeah, definitely. But also, like Nirvana is also like all over the board. Yeah. It's just random cool lines thrown together. But at least it's random cool lines. It could have been just random lines. Yeah. So what I also noticed, what I thought was really interesting in terms of the mixing, if you listen to Wilson, which I said as well, like this is one of our favorite tracks. Both of us, we really like this song. What I thought was really interesting about that track was that the guitars were almost clean, and it's like it sounds huge. But it's not because of the guitars. The distortion comes really from everything else. It's really interesting to listen to, and the distortion really comes from the bass, from the snare, from the vocals. There were some tracks where the guitars didn't even take up a lot of space. Yeah, super interesting, because there's 2 guitarists in the band and one person who also sometimes plays the guitar. The guitars just don't really appear that much on this record.
I found a couple of things in, speaking of Wilson, There was a couple of lines in here that I thought were particularly interesting. You already mentioned that I'll stop wearing black when they make a darker color. And speaking of random cool lines together, I think the chorus here was a really good example of that. He says, I hope the roof flies off and I get blown out into space. I always make such expensive mistakes. I know it's just a number, but you're the eighth wonder. I'll stop wearing black when they make a darker color. And altogether, these four things don't really seem to be a part of any sort of overarching narrative at all. I'm embarrassed. I hope I get blown into space. I make such expensive mistakes. That one fits. But then all of a sudden he's telling somebody else that they're the eighth wonder. And then now he's, saying I'll stop wearing black when they make a darker color. And so it feels like what is going on here? But taken separately, those three sentiments are all fairly decent. The eighth wonder one is a little bit cliched, perhaps overused elsewhere, but the Wednesday Addams quote is awesome, and I like he's so embarrassed that he's very over dramatic and says, I hope the roof flies off and I get blown out into space. I like that line. Yeah. There was a verse too, or actually there's something he does in here where he uses repetition really, really well. In this line, don't you know, there's nothing more cruel than to be loved by everybody. There's nothing more cruel than to be loved by everybody but you. And so he repeats what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 words on the second line, but he adds 2 at the end. So it's still, whatever that is, 83% repetitive, but adding those 2 words on the end makes it mean something completely different. And so it's like best of both worlds. It's easy to sing along to, but it also builds onto what he's talking about. So as a lyric writing technique, I thought that was really interesting. I'll talk a little bit about church and why I didn't like it, actually. Now that you've already
agree on something.
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. Church was like if you took Hosier's song "Take Me to Church," but you make it worse and not really have a point, because Hosier's "Take Me to Church" was a really interesting. Take me to church, I'll worship like a dog at the shrine of your lies. It was like an implication of the Catholic Church for how they were treating homosexual youth. And it was really interesting because he was really mad, and you could tell that, but he delivered it in such a very interesting way. But then you get into this song, and they're using the church metaphor here, but they're using it for something that shows up 4 out of 10 times on this album. And that's, hey, there's somebody I love, and I'm just going nuts and I'm obsessed and I basically can't think of anything but her, which is an acceptable feeling for sure. But I don't know. I feel like it's kind of an overused theme just in general. And it doesn't have to be an overused theme. I think if you explain it in an interesting way, but to describe it in through church, I mean, Madonna, didn't she put out a song like that? Like, Take Me There, Like a Prayer. Yeah, Like a Prayer.
Sure.
I think that's the name of the song. But it's like this isn't necessarily like you can write a song being obsessed about somebody, and you can write a song about church, but this combination of them has already been done, and it's been done quite a few times. But yeah, so if you were church, I'd get on my knees, confess my love, I'd know where to be. You got a subtractive rhyme there, which if you're a lyric writer at all, or if you're not a lyric writer, that basically means you rhyme 2 words, knees and be, but on the second word you take away an ending consonant so that it still sort of sounds like it rhymes, but it is just a little bit different, so it's a little bit more interesting, which is something where a lot of people will try to rhyme. Like in the next line he rhymes where to be and holy to me. And me and be is a pretty straightforward. It's a perfect rhyme. But it's nice. It's nice that he kind of gets a little bit different. He does the same thing in the next stanza where he rhymes love with enough. That's not a subtractive rhyme. That's more of an imperfect rhyme or a slant rhyme. Which always I like it when people do that because it just makes it feel a little bit less like a nursery rhyme. And Fall Out Boy actually does a really good job of coming up with some creative rhymes on this album. But there was sound correlation. He uses a ton of that in the first verse of Church. He says, if you were church, I'd get on my knees, confess my love, I'd know where to be. So the sound E starts showing up a lot. My sanctuary, you're holy to me. If you were church, I'd get on my knees, I get on my knees, I get on my knees. And I thought that was a cool way. That's something I've talked about in some of my videos. What do I call it? The euphonic link, or this idea that a stanza can be more applicably or more easily pulled together if there's some sort of like sound that correlates throughout, or some sort of type of sound. So
yeah, that was a great video that you did. Who was that about again?
I did that one about not blank space. I did that about Endgame by Taylor Swift. Yeah.
Yeah,
honestly,
so that's a definite recommendation for me as well. Yeah. Everyone should watch the video.
It was a lot of fun. And it was the idea that you have I keep forgetting the word, euphonic links, which are a correlating type of sound. So you could use end rhyme to keep your stanza together. You could use alliteration, which is something that rappers are going to use more of the time. You could use the sound E, or I guess so that's the euphonic link. The thumbprint, the sonic thumbprint is the expression of that. So if you say, I want to use end rhyme, the thumbprint is going to be you saying, all right, I'm going to rhyme the E sound or something like that. Yeah, or I'm going to use an A-B form for my rhymes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate how important that is in lyric writing, and it's something I think about on a daily basis when I'm writing lyrics, is how can I tie my lines together so they really sound like one, so that there's good cohesion between them. Mm-hmm. And what a lot of my students that I'm coaching through Skype do is that they'll have a line and then they'll kind of repeat it, but they'll add something new, and then they'll do that again and again and again and again, and they're always adding something new, and they're kind of changing the rhythm, or they're adding new pitches. And I think that shows lack of confidence. To me, if I write a great line, I'm like, wow, that sounds amazing. I like the lyrics. I like the melody of it. I like the rhythm of it. Now I'm just going to repeat exactly that. Maybe not the lyrics. Maybe I'm going to change the lyrics, but I want to keep the melody and the rhythm exactly the same. I'm going to keep repeating that until it gets boring to me, which is typically after 3 times. So the 4th time is typically when I change things around. But if I have a good line and I'm confident that it's really good, I'm going to keep repeating that, because to me, it feels like if you are showing me a line and then the next line is different, it feels like you're saying to me, you know what? I have a couple of different versions of this. I'm not sure which one is the best one, so I'm going to show you all of them.
Yeah.
And here's a lot of stuff. Look, here's more, and there's more. Check out this one and this one. Look, what do you think of this one? Maybe this one's better. Maybe you like this one better. And at the end, I sit there and thinking like, yeah, but I didn't really hear a song just now. I just heard a lot of your ideas, but I didn't really hear you putting them together for me in a form that I could really listen to. Like, you didn't make the selection for me. So what are you? Are you an artist, or are you just someone who has ideas and you want to show me that you have ideas?
Yeah.
So for me, an artist is someone who makes decisions for me. So an artist to me is someone who has such a strong character, and their character determines the decisions that they make through their art. And so for me, if you don't make those decisions, to me, that means you're not really an artist. So for me, an artist speaks through their music, because to me, the best music is really is really the kind of music that is very kind of niche, where I feel like, this is someone who has a clear vision behind what they're doing. Like, they know what they want. They know they could have gone for the easy thing, but they went for something that is weird and awkward and strange instead, because that's what they wanted to do, and that was their artistic choice.
Interesting, yeah. Wow. No, now I want to be an artist. It inspired me. I want to go do something crazy too. I'm going to go make the worst sounding music, but at least I will have character.
But seriously,
what you're saying is people are afraid.
I'd rather listen to something that is really ugly,
but
someone presents it with confidence and says, like, this is exactly how I wanted it. And then I love that. I think that's so much more interesting than someone who says, like, I have these ideas, or I'm trying to sound like this band or this artist, but I'm trying to blend in. I'm trying to do everything right. I think that's just never as interesting. I think artists are interesting because they have personality and they dare to show it through their music.
Speaking to somebody who's been working on some lyrics personally recently, it's terrifying, I can imagine where we're just artists in general are coming from, because you try something unique and innovative that's not necessarily safe, and you don't know if people will like it. You haven't done your market research, or it doesn't show up on the Hot 100 or something. Yeah. Like, people might be like, this sucks, and it might make you feel like you suck, something like that. It's super easy to be afraid and to feel very nervous about sharing that kind of stuff with people.
And people are brutal, make no mistake. Which is, they're super brutal. Which is why I always say, you have to have thick skin in this business. Yeah. You really have to have thick skin and test it, show it to people and ask their honest opinion, and find people who are really honest with you. I'm saying this really harshly, but that's how it is. Yeah. That's really how it is. And that's why ultimately I think you need to be really proud of your stuff. You need to be an artist. You need to say, you know what? You might disagree with me. You could be completely right, but I'm right as well, because this is my vision. This is what I want to do. This is my artistic contribution to this world.
Yeah. I was just reading a review of an Imagine Dragons concert by The Guardian, and The Guardian trashed Dan Reynolds and everything about Imagine Dragons. It was was brutal. It was brutal. And he got kind of upset and started tweeting about it. And you were like, oh, yeah, you may not be completely secure in your own ideas if you're, reacting to it like that. But
that's the thing. I mean, no one is that sure in their ideas. I mean, there's some people who are psychopaths, but I think no one, it's impossible to not be empathetic. If someone criticizes your work, it's really hard not to get like sad over it.
Especially when
you
put your heart into it, yeah.
Yeah. And I think it shows that they care about their stuff, If they really just did it for money, then they wouldn't care. But I think they really do care about their stuff, as, almost all big artists do, I believe.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's everyone who's at the top has worked really, really, really very hard for it. So I have nothing but appreciation. I mean, we're, sometimes talking trash about albums, but that's not to diminish the fact that these artists are working extremely hard to get where they've, where they are right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's super impressive in any case.
Oh gosh, yeah. No, I'd be more than willing to trade. If somebody else wants to be a YouTuber who explains song lyrics, I'd love to be a world famous musician. But
I wouldn't, seriously.
Oh yeah,
I'm happy right where I am.
Well, see, I'd cash out. I'd make products, little action figurines, kind of dilute my brand, make a lot of money. And then like, all right, we're done. I'm getting out of here. I'm gonna start my YouTube channel again.
I just maybe I'm in a weird perspective right now because I just saw this interview with Jennifer Lawrence, the actor, and I don't know what she's going through right now, but she's like, she has very liberal views or something like that. I think that's what the issue is, and she was talking about that openly, and some people have really taken offense with that. And she said in interviews, it feels right now, and she was very serious about it, like as if everyone hates me. Like, and if you go on the internet and like type in her name, a lot of people are really trashing her for her views and being so open with them about it. I don't know exactly what her views are. I have no idea because I don't really care about that. I just thought like that hit me hard because it was like, oh man, yeah, that it's so hard. The both of us, we're so lucky that we have fans who like what we do.
Yeah.
And some fans really love what we do. And I'm happy about every positive comment that we get because it just brightens up my day. But every bad comment can seriously mess up my day as well. It's personal work. We love what we do. And if someone criticizes our work, it's still hard for me. It's still hard for me to take it sometimes,
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting too, because if I put out a video I'm really proud of though, and it's like I know I put a lot of work into it and this was really good, and somebody says something bad about it, like I did it and I was happy with it, it's easier for me to like laugh it off and be like, this guy's a moron. But but if I put out something that I kind of half-heartedly put together and I don't really feel confident in it and I put it out there, every time somebody says something bad about it, I'm kind of like, ooh, yeah, it hurts because it's right.
Exactly. That's one of the biggest lessons really to anyone starting their music career right now. Make stuff that you're really proud of.
You're your first audience. If you aren't happy with it, you're only going to feel worse about it. If you have to make sure that you're happy with it before you put it out there, because if you're happy with it, it really won't matter what other people say. I mean, it'll still hurt maybe sometimes, but you can always go back to, but hey, I really like listening to it.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. But I think we're getting off track here a little bit.
For sure, yeah. I was trying to find a way to segue that back, but
it's a really super interesting subject.
Yeah.
It's good that we talked about it, I think.
Well, hey, here's a segue. How do you think Fall Out Boy feels about this album, or how do you think talking about that, like that integrity as an artist and doing something new and like pushing a boundary? Where do you think they lie on that continuum for this album?
Oh man, that was so smooth. Cool.
Thanks.
Cohesion. I like it.
Except for the point where I like pointed it out.
What do you call it? You call it the euphonic link, right? So, to me, I mean, I think they have nothing to be ashamed of here. Yeah. I think it's a solid rock album. I mean, I don't know if it's a good rock album. It pains me to say it's not. I don't think it's their best work, and I think they probably know that. But I think they were trying something new with the whole electronic stuff. And, Young and Menace, for example, really adds a lot of dubstep elements, and it's like a predominant element in that song.
Yeah.
More so than the rock guitars, for example. And I think they really wanted to try something new with their sound.
Something I was really impressed with is they actually were going to release the album, I think in like September, October, or November. They were going to release it last year, I think. And then they listened to it and they were like, yeah, this isn't good enough. We want to do better. And so they went back into the studio and they reworked a ton of stuff. Like it wasn't good enough for their own ears, they felt. And so they went back and they fixed up a bunch of stuff and they had to push the release date back. But I think that shows a lot of artistic integrity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a highly that's a really good thing of them to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like that as well. Like if something isn't quite right, I'll not release it. Which is also why sometimes I release stuff like, overnight. I'm like, oh, you know what? I've been working on this for a couple of months. Here it is. And everyone's like, oh, where does that come from? Well, I'm now feel confident enough to share it with you guys. That's not. I mean, I have release dates. I set release dates for myself, but I never keep them because I always just keep reworking my stuff until I'm really proud of it. And that's the shitty thing when you're with a label and they kind of push you to release at a certain date, that sometimes you just have to release something that you're not really proud of. And they're in a position, obviously, where they can wait a little bit longer and say, you know what, I think we have to wait a little bit longer. And the label is usually going to accept that if they feel the same way. With smaller bands, that might be a little bit more difficult. But yeah, I'm like that as well. I'd rather wait another year before I release something that I'm not proud of.
Yeah, and that's good on you too, man.
So what did you think about Young and Menace, which I think was their
Menace.
first single, if I'm not mistaken?
I think it was, yeah.
What did you think about that song? Because it wasn't one of your favorite tracks, I noticed. What I really liked about it, so as I said, it introduces all of these dubstep elements into the Fall Out Boy mix. The chorus is basically just pitched vocals, so vocalese. The overall arrangement is just really built around the whole dubstep ideas. It doesn't really work live. Like live, he sings along to the vocalese. It's a little bit weird. I feel like it probably would have been better if he just would have stopped singing and just did some headbanging instead with his guitar. And also, I really love the guitars in the chorus. They basically wrote a dubstep arrangement for a rock band, and I think it's cool. I like it. It's overproduced. It's still too much stuff in there, in my opinion. I think it could have been a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more hard-hitting that way if they just took out some of the ideas that they had. But I still think it's really cool.
It's particularly interesting lyrically. In fact, lyrically, it's the most unique song on the album because the average song was 366 words. This one is 2/3 that. It has the fewest number of lines, like half the number of lines of the average song. And it also has some of the least repetition. It's got some of the most unique lyrics, and so only 20% of the lines are copied from somewhere else, whereas the album on average is about 50% copied from somewhere else.
Isn't the chorus like all repetitions? Aren't they just repeating Young and Menace over and over again, or Young and a Menace?
Hey, look, spreadsheets don't lie. So you may be right, but spreadsheets don't lie.
You're so right.
Yeah, I don't remember how it worked out. I did the math, but usually I don't count the first iteration of the repeated phrase, and so I only count it as a repetition the second time it appears. Sometimes that affects the numbers.
Okay. Well, I thought because the chorus, I mean, you probably wouldn't count this as a repetition then. Just the chorus is basically just one line that they just cut up and repeat over and over again, basically.
No. If they're going to do some weird vocal stuff like that, I would only count it as a repetition if they did that exact same weird vocal stuff the next time. So if they say Young and Menace 3 times in a row on one line, I would only count the next line as a repetition.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
But they had I think the reason it was less repetitive is just because there were a lot of there were a couple meaty verses that really helped to make it, more unique. But the other thing that I found out, they had some of the least, what was this? They had a low percentage of lines that rhyme. And among those, they also, so something I measure sometimes is whether a rhyming line rhymes with, like if you end a line with the word be and then you rhyme it then the next line with the word be again, and so you just kind of like rhyme a word with itself, which I think we talked about in a podcast before. Ed Sheeran's not a big fan of. It's kind of like lazy rhyming. Sometimes it works, but they actually do that very, very little on that song. And then the final uniqueness is that their average syllables per word is very small. So it's a lot of very simple words. It's less repetitive, very simple, very short. It's very, I don't know, I think that kind of made me think it was very incisive. It was like they had one specific thing they wanted to say. They got in there. They didn't waste extra time doing it. They kind of let the music do the talking and let the lyrics just sort of act as a decoration for that.
Interesting. Yeah, the short words is definitely something we see a lot in pop music. And anything that's kind of commercial, we see a lot of short words just because, they're easier to swallow.
Yeah. I think Eminem, for his revival album, it was something like he had 1.25 syllables per word. And Young and Menace, the song, had 1.17 syllables per word. So that doesn't mean a ton to everybody, but basically every fifth word or every sixth word has 2 syllables. Yeah.
Okay. But 1.27 for Eminem? I thought it would be higher.
Yeah, you would think, but for some reason, actually, honestly, 1.25 is a pretty high number as far as that goes. I think the thing I realized, because I was surprised when I saw that too, is I was like, all right, Eminem's for sure going to have like 3 syllables a word or something like that. But you end up throwing so many simple filler words in there, or just, words like I or we or you or something like that it really brings the average down. So, but even still, something with a 1.25 is pretty significant, and something with a 1.17 is going to be on the lower end of the spectrum.
Would be really interesting to see just like how many long words he uses in total, because I think obviously he uses a lot more words in general, but I think he probably uses a lot of long words, whereas I don't know, a lot of pop artists probably don't use long words at all.
No, they definitely don't.
And I think there's studies being done that I think are really interesting and show classifying different artists by the use of words, how they would score on SAT tests. That I think is super interesting. I think it's a really smart way of like judging kind of how long. They're looking at how long the words are, what kind of words they're using. I think Eminem was scoring pretty high actually.
Oh, he would for sure. Yeah, no, dude's got a vocabulary that way better than anything I have. Yeah. I'm looking through Young and Menace, and some of the most complicated words are supposed, menace, honestly, and then coursing. Yeah, those are.
What's that last one?
Coursing like a river, or energy coursing through you.
Oh, gotcha.
And then he has psych assessment, but yeah, nothing you'd have to find a dictionary for the most part.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What did you think about? Wilson was another one of your favorites. Also one of my favorites here. It's also one of the more electronic songs. It has some trap drums on it. In terms of the harmony, it's really the only moment on the entire album when we get some more interesting harmony, because in the pre-chorus we're going to a 4 major and then 4 minor, so we're going into a negative perfect cadence, and then we lead up to the 1 of the chorus. So going from a 4 minor to a 1 major is what's called a negative perfect cadence, which I just learned from the comments on YouTube under my Radiohead video.
Oh, cool.
Because Radiohead does something very similar in Creep and a bunch of other songs as well. So I still learn from my students, which is awesome. That's one of my favorite things about holistic songwriting for sure. So that was kind of the only moment when harmonically, they were doing something really interesting. They did some more interesting stuff on their previous album, I think, on their previous albums. They were a little bit more experimental with harmony, but never too much. I mean, they were still predominantly a commercial pop band, so they were never too experimental with harmony. But that was a cool bit here. Cool little detail that I liked. What did you think of Wilson in terms of the lyrics, and what did you notice about it?
I'll say 2 things about it. One, the line, "If we hadn't done this, I think I'd be a medicine man so I could get high on our own supply whenever I can." I thought that was a really dumb lyric, but yeah, I didn't know that it was like, I don't know, is it a stereotype that Native American medicine men like carried marijuana around or something? I don't know. I wasn't familiar enough with that to fully appreciate it, I think. But I was like, I mean, yeah, a drug addiction's always, good for a laugh. But overall, I liked the idea that he's like talking about mistakes, and he's mentioning that he's, made some errors and he wants to try to correct them. And I like the phrase expensive mistakes. I think that's a cool phrase. And it reminds me of something that you can really, if you're going to write your own song lyrics, sometimes taking like a cliched or an overused phrase, which this borders on being, not quite. But you can take like a phrase like that, and if you just try to think about it from a different perspective and write a song around it, you can usually come up with something fairly interesting, help people to see something from a new perspective, and at the very least, it will be interesting, particularly because it's not only your perspective, but it's, making them just think of something in a way they hadn't before. So those are my thoughts on Wilson.
Also, in this song and in almost all of the other songs, I really like the vocal performance of Patrick Stump. I think he's a fantastic vocalist. I always thought so. I think he's always been like one of the really great vocalists in rock music. He has some really interesting melodies. He's not just like, as I said before, he's not just basing them on one-note melodies, but he's really into the harmony, and he's always doing some cool stuff on all of his records, and this really shows here on this record as well. So
yeah, he did.
That's
a good
something
job.
I want to. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And all of them, I think, really are putting a lot of energy into it. This whole album is really, you know, growling energy. Like, it feels like it really pushes forward, not just because of the production, but also because of the performances. Every single performance on this, you know, the drums, the bass, all of them really are super powerful. And everyone just, it feels like everyone put all of their life into this performance.
Yeah,
so kudos
agreed.
for that.
Agreed.
Yeah, I just had 2 more notes on Heaven's Gate and Champion. I don't know if you had anything to say about those, but Heaven's Gate, the start reminded me of like a modern How Can You Mend a Broken Heart by Al Green, which is a song that was popularized by that movie Notting Hill. It just kind of reminded me of that. It was kind of like a ballad. I thought that was interesting, and I didn't see it coming because it was like, you know, what's a ballad got to do on this album? But it was pretty cool, and I like the song. Champion also reminded me of a song. It has like a melody line in the pre-chorus, I think, that sounds very much like a line from Carry Out by Timberlake and Timbaland, which I love. I love that song. I think it's one of Timberlake's best songs. But it really reminded me of that. But I also like Champion a lot, actually. I said that earlier already. But yeah. Your thoughts on these 2 songs? Anything you want to say about those?
They did that thing in Heaven's Gate where they combine lyrics and don't necessarily, it seems like, you know, you're not really sure how they connect to each other. He sings, I'm going to need a boost because everything else is a substitute for you. But he's talking, he says, give me a boost over Heaven's Gate. I'm going to need a boost because everything else is a substitute for you. And typically, if somebody was going to say they need a boost over Heaven's Gate, you would think that they're saying like, hey, I'm not perfect, so I couldn't quite make it into heaven, so I'm going to need you to help me sneak in. But if he's going for heaven, but he also, everything else is a substitute for her, wouldn't heaven be one of those things that was a substitute for her love? Wouldn't he just want to like roll around on the outside heaven clouds with her? And so, yeah, it was something we've talked about already. I felt like Heaven's Gate was an interesting concept. I just wish that they had doubled down and gone one route or the other. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of metaphors where you like compare somebody's love to a drug. In the bridge, he sings, "You're the one habit I just can't kick," and I don't know. I feel like it's obviously like, apart from whether I'm too
better
picky
than
about,
"You're the one ball I just can't kick."
Is that an actual line somewhere?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Thank goodness.
But it would be terrible.
You're the one ball I just can't kick. I feel like that could be a cool bridge if you set it up really well in the verse. Somebody needs to write that song, and the challenge is write a verse that will make this line make sense.
That's great.
But yeah, no,
it.
I kind of get bored when people want to talk about like drug addiction or talk about love in terms of it being addicted to a drug, which I think normalizes harmful drug addiction. But anyway, maybe I'm...
That's true. I do like it, though. I like dark lyrics. So I like dark metaphors for things that are normally really like pretty and beautiful and, princess-themed stuff.
Yeah.
I like it when people bring in those really dark metaphors. And, I Can Feel My Face being an example of this.
Yeah. You can't...
By The Weeknd.
Can't Feel My Face. That was a good one. That was a good use of that because it was unique. And they were doing it in a way that hadn't been done before. I think that like just simple like I'm addicted to you it's just been done too many times for it to really catch people's ear. But I Can't Feel My Face when I'm with you. Like I love that song because it makes you think.
Oh, and Habits by Tuvalu should be mentioned at this point as well. I really love that song.
Is that
Gotta Stay High All the Time to Keep You Off My Mind? So it's not technically
yeah.
It's not necessarily a metaphor for love, but it's mixing in love with drug use, and I think it's really interesting how she does that.
Yeah, I like that one too. It's married with a really good melody that's really catchy.
Yeah, very true. Especially the remix. I really love the remix of that song. I think I like it even better than the original.
Yeah, I think
very, very well done.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go listen to that after this.
Yeah, it's super cool. Like they have like how the snare comes in. Like there's like this sawtooth pad kind of that just kind of ducks out once the snare comes in. So it's like whack, and it's super cool, man. I just love that because it's so tense. Like the entire verse is super, super tense. I really dig it. All right, that's it for mine. Do you have anything more to say about this album?
Did you want to say something else about Champion, or had you already?
No, that was kind of it.
Okay.
I just wanted to say
Cool.
that it reminds me very much of Carry Out by Timberlake and Timbaland. Yeah. That was all I wrote down, really.
The one thing I'll add to that then is just there are a couple lines in Champion that I thought were really good. I'm just young enough to still believe, but young enough not to know what to believe in. And even though Fall Out Boy, they're actually fairly old at this point, I think that really is something that their fans can, feel and that they can understand.
Emphasize
I thought that was a really cool line.
Cool. Yeah, good line. All right.
Yep.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. If you have any more suggestions as to which albums we should be talking about on this series, please let us know in the comments. Let us know if you liked the Fall Out Boy album, Mania. What you think? Did you think it held up against their previous albums? Did you like the lyrics? Do you agree with us or do you not? That's a lot of things that you should put into one singular comment, for sure. Yeah, so hope you guys like this. Cliff, thanks for doing this with me, and I'll see you again next month.